Thank you. And with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Tamara Gallman. I'm going to go a little bit off script before I read her bio and say that Tamara and I, as well as a number of other folks in this room, had the great pleasure of working together a number of years ago at the CDC. We were, many of us, new to government, new to the CDC, and we were working in a brand new center there, and we were really trying to build something to advance health communication. We believed very deeply in the field and the opportunity and the collaboration. And it was just such a wonderful time to be there with like-minded people building something. And the only other time I really have felt like that in health communication is in the society. So being in meetings like this where we can have conversations, where we see each other, where we can really connect on how much we care about this field and how much we want to advance it. So I just want to say that thank you everyone who came to join us here today. Thank you everyone who's watching online. Thank you everyone who is from an organizational member that's joined and is supporting the organization, because there's a lot of potential and a lot of enthusiasm. And so I think this is a very special time as well. So with that, I'll introduce Tamara. She has had a long career in public health, not that long because we started at the same time, we're very young, and has experience in the areas of partnership development, engagement, health communication, marketing strategy, and strategic planning. Her public health career began at the National Cancer Institute as a health communication fellow. She also graduated from Johns Hopkins University with a Master of Science in Marketing and served as a Presidential Management Fellow at CDC. She's going to tell you a little bit more about herself, her background, where she is now, and her current role as founder and executive director of Disability Partnerships. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tamara.
Hello, can you guys hear me okay? So first, let me just say thank you. Thank you to the Society for inviting me to participate. I'm very honored. And please, I want this to be informal. So if at some point, because I do have some vocal quality issues, so if at some point my voice gets too low, just, yell at me in a nice way, please. So let me tell you just a little bit about myself. So as Erin mentioned, I am a public health professional. I've been doing that for many years. But so I want to pivot a little bit to my personal story. So about 10 years ago, I was in a natural gas explosion in my home. And my husband and I were both in the home. I was thrown from the second floor and hit what they believe is I hit the chain link fence in the backyard. And that is what severed my spine. So as you can tell, I spent the bulk of my life as what we call able-bodied. And then suddenly, 10 years ago, I became physically disabled. And so I've had multiple hospitalizations. I think I'm on surgery number 40, surgery procedure, some major, some minor, but I have spent, as I just said, most of the last 10 years in and out of hospitals. And so I've had everything from every kind of hospital infection you can name. So I guess the question is, am I oversharing? Maybe a little bit. But I want you to understand that the community I'm in, I had to learn what the community's needs were. And so that's what led me to start my nonprofit. And I think somebody said this in the mental health panel. The nonprofit was for others, but it was also for me. It was a way for me to heal. And let me just say this too. I kind of sped through the accident part, but it was, of course, very devastating. I went from being able to walk, I was very independent, did a lot of things, enjoyed life, and then literally the very next day, I wasn't able to walk, and I had a myriad of health issues that I'd never really dealt with before. And so it was very upsetting to me. But one of the things that I realized as time went on, I developed peer groups within the disability community, but also I learned how to really address some of the mental health issues that I faced. And of course, we're all vulnerable, and we've been very honest in here, which I appreciate. But of course, anxiety, depression, fear, I had no idea. I spent the first year, pretty much the first year of my life, or of that life, during that time rather, I spent in the hospital. So I'll never forget the day I was supposed to get out. I did not know. We didn't even have a place to stay. And so my husband had found a place, but I'd never been there before. And that was the first time in my life when I wasn't involved in my housing decisions. And so I was very apprehensive. I was fearful. I didn't know anything about what marriage would look like, what my health would look like, anything like that. And I remember there was a nun at the hospital, and I said to her, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. What do? I don't know anything about being disabled. I don't know what health care looks like as a disabled person. And she gave me so much peace, just the one word, and I think we talked about this earlier when it comes to mental health and the things that you say to people. And she said to me, the same God that saved you in that explosion is the same God that will help you now. And so that just, of course, stuck with me. And so I decided to start my nonprofit, and it's called Disability Partnerships. And so I use my background, which is my health communications, my experience with stakeholder relationships, partnership building, to really help. Because what I started to realize very quickly is that the issues of health inequality were very, very serious. I could give you so many examples of things that I had absolutely no idea would occur. And just to make a long story short, I'll give you kind of two very, I think, significant. One, I remember going to the ER. I had fallen out of my chair. I had a fracture, or it felt like a fracture. My leg was swollen, all that stuff. And I'll never forget, the ER doctor said, well, he literally did this. There's really nothing we can do. You can't walk anyway. And this is true stories. And I remember then talking to another doctor who became very angry and said, that's really sad, and emphasized the unethical treatment I received. But that was par for the course. I can tell you about many times when I had x-rays, where I needed x-rays and they didn't want to do it because they were uncomfortable trying to lift me, where I had conversations with people about trying to explain to, and I'm talking about medical professionals, where I said, okay, well, I can't walk, so how do I get on the exam table? Oh, can you stand? No, I can't walk. Well, do you think you can stand for a minute? No, I can't walk. And I'm serious. These are real conversations to just even the layout of the doctor's office, one of the doctors that I went to. So I decided, based on that, based on conversations with other peers in the disability community, that there needed to be some focus on that. And there's lots of organizations, so don't get me wrong. There are lots of organizations that are focused on the needs of people with disabilities. But what I thought I could bring was my professional experience with partnership development, my professional experience with health communications, and then what I felt like was my knowledge and ability to straddle both worlds. Since I had been able-bodied for so long, I understood it's not always an issue of meanness. It's just sometimes ignorance. There are things I had no idea were issues for people, and especially when it comes to health access. So that brings me to developing the nonprofit. So I started with all the tenets we know from health communications research. I did lots of research. I looked at all the other organizations out there. I tried to find out what were the gaps in healthcare needs that may or may not have been addressed. I looked at myself and what I thought was important, what I realized. And what I mean by that is one of the things I wanted to do was get healthy. I've never been like a super skinny person, but I knew that it would be more difficult for me in a wheelchair and being unable to walk. So I wanted to figure out, okay, what can I do? I can't walk, but I can do something. What is it? So I would call the local, parks and recreation. I called gyms. I went to like a boxing facility. It was all the same thing. There was a lot of trepidation, fear working with me. People automatically assumed that I was fragile. They didn't want to help. They were afraid of lawsuits. I remember when I went to the boxing place, and I was really excited because I thought, even if everybody's doing kickboxing, I can do this. But the classes were tailored for people who could walk, and I'll never forget, the instructor told me, I don't have time to show you how to do these exercises. And I thought, okay, so here we are again. And these are very small examples of the many conversations I had. And one of the classes that I did find was almost 30 miles away, the adaptive exercise class. And, forget the gyms. I would try to go into a gym. They would tell me it was accessible, but then none of their equipment was accessible. I couldn't get on anything. I couldn't use anything. If I did have somebody to help, it was a whole ordeal because they had to have a full gym membership too. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm the only one who's working out. So the point is, I said to myself, let's try to figure out how to fix this. And that was something I did for my healing. And again, I hearkened to what was said earlier. I felt like it was a healing process for me. So I wrote down all the things that I thought, wouldn't it be great if? And so one of those things was we started a health and wellness for all program, but it was specific to health and wellness adaptive exercise classes. I researched, I found grants, I contacted the local rehab hospital. They ended up giving me a grant. So I started off first with a self-defense class. And so the self-defense class was designed for people with either limited to no mobility. And it was supposed to help them feel more empowered. And I partnered with a group. We did the class, and then I thought, okay, and again, it's the tenets we learn in health communications. This works. Now what next? Because I didn't want to stay there. The next piece for me was, let's expand the classes. Let's do other things. So then we did a seated adaptive exercise class, and I received a grant from, like I said, the local hospital, the Adventist Healthcare Rehabilitation Facility in Maryland, where I lived at the time. So they believed in what we were trying to do, but as part of that, and I think this is where I think it's important as health communications professionals for us to understand, I volunteered there first. So I volunteered in the hospital as someone with a disability, and I learned, because again, I had no idea what I could only tell my very limited experience as someone with a disability. So volunteering in the rehab hospital helped me to get different perspectives, and I've learned so much more about life in the community, from amputees, from people with, elderly people who had strokes. So I was able to really kind of pinpoint other things that I wanted to do with the nonprofit. And so I ended up with 3 core programs: the health and wellness program I mentioned earlier, economic empowerment, and education and affordable accessible housing. And I always say 3 programs, but economic empowerment and affordable housing, affordable accessible housing, I actually combine. So because my organization is small and it is my nighttime job, I have a daytime job, and I think I mentioned it earlier in my comment. I work for the FDA and in health communications and partnership development. So I'm only able to do my disability partnership work in the evenings and on the weekends. So a lot of what I did, I really had to make sure were things that, working with volunteers, I met a lot of great people within the hospital setting. They really started to believe in the work that I was doing. They were able to help. So during the day when I was working, they were doing things. And then I also developed partnerships with community-based organizations who had the knowledge that I needed. They already had, excuse me, they already had the inroads, and they understood the background that I didn't really have. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, we want to be
Oh,
questions as well.
oh yeah, I'm sorry. So where did I leave off? Oh, anyway,
background.
yes. Oh, I'm still in the background. Okay. So, well, the communications piece. So anyway, I'm sorry about that. But the communications piece, I think what I most want to share is that one thing I really understood is that having someone in the community, I think we've all discussed this, having someone in the community who truly understands what you need to accomplish in order to, or who understands and can help you accomplish your goals. Now that I'm disabled, I get it so much better. I understand. It's not enough to say to people, well, go to the gym. No, it's not that easy. First of all, I can't drive. Second of all, when I get there, a lot of times I feel very uncomfortable because everyone is staring. So if you can't even get me out the door, how is that going to help me? And then everything from nutrition counseling, there are very specific needs that I have as someone with a spinal cord injury. And so the classes, we actually have grown very drastically. We started off with 2 classes, 6-month period. It grew so much that we now have at the end of 2021, we had 3,100 people who participated in our classes. They grew from 2 to, I have 15 classes now, all mostly volunteers, but I do have trainers who are well-trained in working with people with disabilities. We have an adaptive exercise, adaptive yoga. We have a Tai Chi. And one of the things that I have decided, or I decided early on, is I wanted to hire people who were also disabled. So 50% of the staff who work for me now are either amputees or they are in wheelchairs. So, and we also added a self-care program. And the self-care program, and this happened as a result of COVID too, I received another grant from the Christopher and Dana Reeves Foundation, and that allowed me to do self-care classes because there was such a huge mental health issues with persons with disabilities, the isolation and just the pain that people felt. So the classes we added were things like the art of journaling to help with emotional and mental health. We did lots of virtual games. So it grew from the folks who were participating in the adaptive Zumba. So we have about 15 different classes, and I'm really excited about the program, so I'll stop talking now. I'm sorry if I went too far.
I'm going to go to Mike and see if we have any questions. And while you're pulling one up, I will start with my own question, which is that are you open to partnerships and collaborations with people in the room?
Oh, yes, I would love it. I will preface it with we are, and I think Turin, who was on the panel earlier, he said this very well, which is, his organization is growing and it's small. So we are growing as well, but we welcome opportunities. And it doesn't have to be that you have a program that's just for people with disabilities. That's what I'm trying to get away from. If you have a program, we would like for our disability community to be engaged. And it doesn't have to be, whatever it is. Health and wellness, as we all know, cuts across. So it could be even the built environment, economic, because those are all things that, as we know, address the mental, physical, and spiritual needs of all persons, especially people with disabilities.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to throw it to Mike.
Yep. So we have a question from Zoom, and so the question is, what are the top 3 accommodations you wish most people were aware of when offering health services or programs that are adapted for those with physical disabilities?
Well, I would say this. One thing I think people don't realize is transportation is a huge issue. So, and COVID is horrible, but the one, and I even hate to say good thing, has been that virtual environments are now the norm. And so that's what our programs are, all virtual. So I have people across the U.S. who participate in our classes. So our programs, they started off in person because we actually started off in 2019. And then, of course, as we know, we started off early in 2019. And then we switched to virtual. And so it's become what I believe is going to be the platform and model that we have from now on, because I've realized that so many people who wanted to go to the gym but could not, they just didn't have the car, they didn't have the nursing aid or support to get them there. But transportation, I'd say, is one. The second is money. Medical costs are extraordinary, as we all know, but they're even worse when you're disabled. I think I have a really good job, and I can tell you I even have times where I shudder when I see my bills. And I'd say the third thing would be support, just that support and the accountability. And that's what we try to, or what we do build with the various classes that we have. A lot of the people that participated in our classes, I've seen them go back for more, to things that they would never have done before. Oh, I didn't think I could do adaptive yoga. Oh, now you have adaptive Zumba. That sounds great. I'll try that. Because they had never really thought about themselves as being comfortable enough to try something like that, because they were in a wheelchair, or they used a cane, or they had a walker, or they were an amputee.
We may have time for a few more questions at the end, but we're going to pause here so I can introduce our second speaker. But please join me in giving a very big round of applause to Tamara.